Hello and welcome to the Onyx Path Twitch channel. I am Travis Legg, the Onyx Path Twitch programming coordinator who's having some green screen problems behind him this morning, so I apologize. We're starting a little bit later than scheduled with our Expedition RPG, Expedition Scoured Lands Q&A. I had some tech gremlins that I'm going to go ahead and blame those. But our guest, Todd Medema, is that accurate? Did I screw up your pronunciation there?
It's Dutch.
Well, our guest, Todd, is from Expedition RPG and going to tell us a little bit about the game and about the Scoured Lands expansion. So, Todd, starting off, why don't you tell us who you are, what you do, your pronouns, and a little bit about Expedition RPG.
Yeah, thanks again for having me on. So I'm kind of a hobbyist game designer, a software engineer by trade. And so one of my best friends and I created Expedition about 4 years ago with this kind of idea of how could we bring software engineering into board games. At the time, we had just played XCOM, which has this awesome companion app experience, and we wanted to kind of see more of that. And we really loved RPGs, but we're kind of sad about how bogged down they got with all the little minutia and all the math, and it kind of drove us nuts that in D&D it took like an hour to fight a sewer rat, and we're like, that doesn't really make any sense. So we kind of played around with this idea of using an app to speed up the role playing so that you could really kind of stay in character and feel like combat is actually fast paced. And many months of experimenting later, Expedition was born. We've had a few really successful Kickstarters at this point, and Scoured Lands is actually our first cross-IP collaboration, so we're really excited to be launching that.
And speaking as the line developer for Scoured Lands, I'm really excited to see it. I was peripherally aware of Expedition prior to hearing about the Scoured Lands expansion. So it brought me over to checking it out, and it is really cool. It is it just looks like so much fun, and so many modular opportunities for how you can approach it. You know, you can do like a solo play, or you can play it with friends. It seems to be a very, very smart and cool engine. Can you talk a little bit, I guess, about, you know, for someone who has not encountered it yet, for the audience member who might be unaware completely of what Expedition RPG is, what's it like at the table? What's your experience when you sit down with Expedition RPG to play?
Yeah, so Expedition at its core is just a deck of cards. This is the Scoured Lands expansion, but basically all of the rules are on the cards. And then there's a companion mobile app that walks you through all the rules. So you actually don't have to do any pre-reading. It's like a video game, so the app just teaches you how to play as you play. So we often say that you can learn how to play in just 5 minutes. So the app will walk you through drawing your character card, drawing your abilities, and then you're just straight into the story. And there's 2 ways to play stories in Expedition. The app itself has over 100 stories built in. Some of them are official, really polished quests that the team has written. The Scoured Lands expansion actually includes several quests written by the Onyx Path team that are really cool quests as well. But we also have a lot of community written quests, so anyone can actually create their own adventures and share them out. So there's a huge variety of adventures to play. And so then you kind of hop into the traditional role-playing experience where you're in character, you're making choices, and then combat hits. And this is really one of the special parts about Expedition. So the app has a timed component. You can disable it if it's not your thing, but it's kind of one of the special things. So you have 10 seconds to pick which ability you're going to play. So you have your hand, and you're kind of having to quickly make that choice. Like in real combat, you can't sit there for 5 minutes thinking like, do I want a fireball or do I want a magic missile? Like, you have to move. And so then once you've placed your ability, everyone puts their finger on the screen, And so there's this kind of group collective experience of like, Joe, come on, they're gonna hit us. Because
Right.
if you take too long, the enemies deal you extra damage. And so then once you've done that, the app handles all the math for you, tells you how much damage you take, all of that.
Okay, um, so if you're playing with like a group, everybody sort of syncs up their apps together, and then it
So
just.
yeah, so if you're at a table together, you only have one app in the center of the table.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
about a year ago, actually, we did add a remote play option. So you can actually play Expedition with people in different locations
Oh, cool.
and synchronize their apps. So kind of like real world tabletop simulator, you know?
Oh, that's awesome. That's really cool. Yeah, so it sounds like a pretty robust engine as well in terms of on the tech side. And so, what uh, I'm very intrigued by the combination of the physical cards with the mobile app. What prompted that design choice?
Yeah, so at the very beginning, our approach was informed by this idea of both my co-creator and I are software engineers, and so we were like, what can we bring that's unique to the tabletop gaming arena? And we're like, well, we're both like really good software engineers, and there's not a lot of software games, so like let's kind of start with that as our hypothesis and see if there is actually something we can do with it. And it turned out to be actually a really interesting question, right? Because there's a lot of different ways you can have the physical world interface with software, and we
Right.
played around with a lot of them. Like, do you have QR codes on the cards that you scan? Do you try to do some sort of like augmented reality thing? Um, and so there, we played around with them. We found that they weren't the right fit for what we were trying to do. Ultimately, we wanted something where the digital side is there to make it easier, not harder. And a lot of these implementations, like having to scan cards, just got really in the way. So we
Right.
ended up coming up with this. Basically, our hypothesis was, how do you minimize the boundary between physical and digital? How do you have provide as little information as possible between the two? Because if you're scanning in every card, that's a lot of information that you have to send back and forth. And so we ultimately reached this pretty streamlined idea of a single number that you have to keep track of, which is how strong are the enemies still left on the table.
Okay. So, and how does that relate to like, so do you have any like health, like your character has like a health trait, right? Like how are you tracking your own?
Yeah. So every character has their own health tracker along the bottom, and you slide a clip to keep track of your health.
Okay.
And um, then you have your ability cards, and so those are entirely physical. So you play them, you read the rules on them, and then the enemy cards. Here's a good one. They have lovely art. I'm super happy with how the art turned out. But you can see towards the top how they have tier,
Okay.
and so that's the number that the app cares about, is what is the sum of enemy tiers still in play.
Okay. And so that's what that uses to determine like the damage that it's dealing to the players and things along those lines.
Yep. And then you can also see how the enemies have their own health trackers. And so the players keep track of the enemy's health in the real world with clips.
Excellent. And then so like so it will know once you've cleared once you've killed the enemies off, or do you have to like add in like when you've gotten an enemy down to zero? Do you have to?
Yeah, so every time you knock out an enemy, you just change the strength of enemies remaining.
Oh, okay,
And then
gotcha. All right,
when that equals zero, it knows you've won.
that's awesome. That's sounds really cool and streamlined. And I've seen like I know there was a beta test play when with the Scoured Lands expansion that is up on YouTube. And I got a chance to watch that last week. It was very interesting because it's got the full narrative kind of broken out as one person playing. So it's really cool to see that solo play aspect as well. So what going from that engine, I guess what drew you to Scoured Lands? How did that relationship blossom?
Yeah, I think we met the Scoured Lands team at Origins a couple of years ago, and they just really liked our system, and we really liked chatting with them. And we're like, hey, what is there an opportunity to work together? And it kind of lined up. The Scoured Lands team wanted to kind of push the boundaries of what's possible with role-playing games. We're always thirsty for awesome new settings and stories, so it just made a lot of sense.
Cool. And was there anything about the setting that you found particularly gelled well, or that you found a particular challenge in terms of adapting it to the system?
I'm actually surprised that we didn't run into any real challenges adapting the setting. When we first started working on Expedition, our goal was to make it more of a role-playing system than any particular setting. So in our base deck, we kind of run the gamut of, like, there are beasts and undead and magical creatures. So we kind of like try to cover the widest array as possible. And thankfully, we saw that flexibility really pan out with Scoured Lands, where we were able to just kind of slot it in, and it kind of worked with all the core mechanics.
Right, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm really basing my knowledge off of what I've read in the in the releases about it. I've not had the opportunity to sit down and play it yet. My deck is on its way in the mail right now, but there was the only mechanical add that the Scoured Lands expansion brings in terms of like additional chunks is the Titan spawn creature type, right? Is that correct?
Yep. And so here you can see on the back of the cards that this is the new Titan spawn enemy type. And you can actually see on the front of this card that its surge effect is based on other Titan spawn.
Okay.
So this is all Titan spawn regain 2 health. So there's a nice little interplay with the new enemies. But we do also add, new beasts and magical creatures as well. This is actually our most prolific expansion when it comes to enemies. There's, I think, 20 new enemies. So that's pretty fun, and all of them have the new art as well. So we had a lot of fun working on the art for this project.
Yeah, the one of my favorite aspects of the setting, and I love the setting through and through, but the creatures and the sort of monsters and enemies and Titan spawn that you find in Scoured Lands, it's just such a rich environment for those. How did you narrow it down to 20?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because when we started working on this project, Eddie sent us the full Scoured Lands lore, and we spent the weekend flipping through all these books, and we're like, there's so much rich visual history here. So what we ended up doing is we talked with Eddie and a bunch of Scoured Lands players of like, what are the most memorable or important enemies and loot and abilities in the game. So that kind of helped us prioritize that list.
Cool. Awesome. And so in terms of assembling that then, like, were there, because obviously you're dealing with compared to Dungeons and Dragons, where you have a like 0 to 30 scale kind of challenge rating, right? Mm-hmm. The challenge rating in Expedition is basically tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, effectively, right?
Yeah, so we have enemies now that go up to tier 5. Okay. And the way we kind of structured the combat mechanics is that a tier 1 to 3 encounter is your kind of like beginning of adventure, like you have a wooden sword type fight, and then depending on kind of how long the adventure goes and how much loot you're able to build up, somewhere between like a tier 5 and a tier 8 tends to be the boss fight.
Okay.
And you know, that means if it's kind of a tier 5 fight, you might just fight the ultra powerful boss monster, but usually the expectation is there's a minion or two in there as well.
Cool. And is there a mechanic? So, like, the improvement to the characters as you play is achieved through loot, correct?
So it's really three things result in kind of the leveling up experience. The first is loot, which is a very physical, like, you know, you're building a pile of loot. That's very rewarding. The second is abilities, which is more of a refinement mechanic. So as you level up, you can draw new abilities and get rid of old ones. So you can really polish how your character plays. And then the third one, especially for new players, is really kind of learning and understanding the system. You know, we designed it. One of my favorite sayings in game design is like seconds to learn, years to master. And so we really tried to design the system such that if you've never played an RPG before, you can kind of pick it up and like win a tier 1, tier 2 fight. But you can immediately see how you could have done better. And so there are all these interactions that happen. You know, like maybe I'm a bard and I want to boost your roll, but then you didn't know that I was doing that, so you played like a really easy ability. And so as you get better at the game, you really learn how to communicate quickly as a team, which is honestly not something that many other games teach because they don't have that timed component.
Right, exactly. You can sit around when you're playing a standard tabletop RPG and discuss the you know, what's the next move, as long as the GM will allow you to. You know.
Yeah.
So it really becomes kind of like a table by table sort of determination of how that is going to function. But that's cool. That's interesting to see. Now, is there any sort of mechanic in play or any sort of fashion in which somebody might integrate like a campaign style play where they would retain a character and retain loot or something like that?
Yeah, so we do actually have a few community written quests that are multi-episodic, and they usually have you retain your character, your ability, your loot, and they've specifically designed their quest so that the difficulty ramps kind of across them. Like you can't hop into episode 3 with a brand new character and survive.
Right.
So they've adapted the system to work well there, and that's part of the amazing thing about the Expedition community is like people are innovating on top of our system all the time. You can even make your own cards. So people have written quests that use custom cards, and it's something we've talked about for the core system. Is do we want to like really embrace the kind of like multi-night campaigns? And we have actually decided kind of not to make that a core feature of the system. I think there are a lot of fantastic RPGs out there for that kind of like months or years long adventure, but ultimately the thing that we think Expedition really brings to the table is that quick, lightweight feel, and bringing in all of the mechanics necessary to make year-long campaigns work would ultimately kind of sacrifice some of that core value prop.
Gotcha. That's cool. And yeah, so like this is the kind of thing that you could, you know, if you're sitting around, you know, just at a game night with friends, you could break out, you know, play a couple rounds of, because I was reading like average playtime is what, like 30 to 60 minutes.
Yeah.
Is that accurate?
Yeah. So we have over 100 quests. Some are as short as 20 to 30 minutes, but we do have 1 to 3 hour long quests as well. But it's kind of all centered around that kind of one night. You can use it as a filler while waiting for the last person to get to your game night, or you can play a whole night of Expedition too.
That's awesome. That's super cool. And because I have an experience with community content, and that's kind of my wheelhouse, I guess, for lack of a better term. I was very intrigued to see that sort of community quest creation setup that you have. Can you talk a little bit about like how does that work, and how would that work incorporating Expedition Scoured Lands into it, and the other expansions you have as well?
So Expedition has this tool that lets you write interactive stories, and it's basically Microsoft Word, but with additional tooling to let you make these interactive choices. So I'm pulling up the app here. As you can see, we have lots and lots and lots and lots of quests. So when you select a quest, it runs you through the setup instructions, and then it's really just text-based. You basically have story text, and then you have a choice. And so you're kind of going through the story, making choices like you would in D&D. Like, do you want to talk to the barkeeper or just order a beer? And so we really tried to make that experience as non-intimidating as possible, so that really anyone can do it. And we've even had junior high school teachers use the quest creator in their class as like a story writing tool, which has been really cool.
That's super cool. Because as you're building it out, it gives you those, like it gives you those points to enter, right? Like it shows you kind of where you can enter in those decision points and whatnot, and gives you like a map for it. Is that an accurate?
Yeah. And so one of the really cool things that these quests let you do, like your point earlier, is that you can play Expedition solo, or even with a couple. Like one of our largest audiences is actually a couple gamers who want to play an RPG together, but you can't do that with a traditional RPG because someone has to be the DM.
Right. Whereas with this, you're sort of like offloading that onto the quest generator itself, so it's pretty neat.
And you can still be a DM in Expedition. We have a whole section of the app called DM's Corner.
Okay.
That kind of gives you the lightweight framework for you to tell your own story on top of. And we've actually found that DMs love Expedition because it's so lightweight. Like, if you enjoy kind of improvising a story as you go, you can totally do that in Expedition. You don't have to like pre-compute encounters or anything. You just have to know, like, I need, like, this next fight should be about a tier 4. So then we're going to play the story, and when we get to a fight, like, you can almost randomly draw enemies, and it'll all just kind of work very smoothly.
Cool. And how does that mechanic work, like, for example, in a pre-built adventure or in a improvised on the fly adventure, in terms of determining what those enemies are, how the enemy draw works? Can you kind of break down roughly like what that would look like at the table?
Yeah. So, you're telling your story, and it's like, okay, it's time for a fight. And the rough guidance we provide for GMs is that, you start on a tier like 1 to 3 fight for the first fight, and then every fight gets about 1 tier harder. So if this is your 3rd fight, your last one is a tier 4, so maybe this is a tier 5 fight, and that's kind of really all you have to know. You can look through the deck, and if it's a kind of outdoor nature-y fight, you might look through the beast deck and be like, oh yeah, let's have them fight a giant. So that's tier 3. So then I need 2 more tiers. So maybe I'll have them fight a dragon cursed as well. You can kind of like very quickly flip through your available options. And really, if you'll notice, the back of the enemy cards also have health trackers. And so you can actually use the backs as create your own enemy.
Okay, so like basically like you can sort of homebrew on the fly, kind of.
Yep, you can use the surge effect on the front of the card and then just use the back of the card to keep track of health.
Oh, nice. And so in addition to the surge effects, what else do the enemies bring to the table?
Yeah, so they obviously have the lovely art that I'm a big fan of. They also have, just below the tier, you can see that there are some damage modifiers. So this giant worm takes 1 less damage from all abilities and 1 more damage from loot. So that kind of forces players to keep on their toes around their team composition and their strategy, because each fight, different abilities and strategies will be more or less effective.
Okay, cool. I dig it. That sounds super dope. So how long would you say if somebody wanted to, so like you'd mentioned earlier, the seconds to learn, years to master, if somebody wanted to approach it in a game mastering sort of a fashion, right, approach it as a DM, how long do you think it would take them to really get their head around that aspect of it, the more on the fly tweaking out those, because it sounds, as you're explaining it to me, it sounds pretty straightforward, but you know, lots of things sound straightforward so they sit down at the table with 4 players.
Yeah. And so it's actually a really interesting question, right? Because one of the things that we want to do with this game is to enable more people to DM. We really love the creativity and kind of improvisation that happens with DMing. And as we worked on this game, we discovered that a lot of people are actually scared of it because it seems so complicated. And so we asked ourselves, like, what are the things that make people scared of DMing? So one of them is certainly the mechanical complexity, right? In D&D, there's like a whole DM's guide. It's like 300 pages. Like that's understandably scary.
Sure.
And so by simplifying combat to this, this single number you're trying to hit of what is the tier of enemies, we really kind of reduce that complexity as much as possible.
Right.
The other aspect that we found a lot of people got scared about with DMing was coming up with a story. And so we've actually been working on additions to the DM's Corner that provide almost a storytelling framework, so that as you're going through the story, and at different levels of thoroughness. So we have ones that are kind of outlines of like, here, you come up with the setting. And then you go to the next card and it's like, now you come up with the call to action, kind of like just guides you through like, this is how to pace a story. And we have other ones that are like, this is like 80% of a story, but it still gives you space to like fill in character names and kind of come up with details. So really kind of giving people every step along the way, from just playing a quest to improvising a little to improvising a lot, all the way to becoming like a full-fledged DM.
Okay, cool. And so taking it to the other side of the table, let's say, I wanted to take my Scoured Lands character, that I've been playing in my tabletop game for the last 5 years, right? And I wanted to port them over into Expedition. Is there a mechanic where a player could build a custom character, or where a player could create or adapt their character's basic abilities over into Expedition?
So there's not a official guide on how to migrate characters, but Expedition is a pretty flexible system. So if you really wanted to bring your character over, you could really just kind of make your own adventurer cards. They all have 12 health. They all start with 6 abilities. And so, you could title your own character the Wayward Adventurer, or your character's name, and then look through the ability decks to decide, like, okay, maybe my character is like a stealthy warrior, and so you can kind of pick out the abilities that most represent your character.
Nice. And you'd said that the are there any additional abilities that are added in the Scoured Lands Expedition deck?
There are. Got a nice set of them. And so in other expansions, we had introduced new types of abilities. In the future, we introduced tech abilities. In the horror, we introduced influence abilities. We decided against introducing a new ability class with Scoured Lands because we found that our existing ability types were already diverse enough to capture a lot, not the full nuances of Scoured Lands, but it's kind of the right level of compromise of not making the system more complex than it needed to be. So we have ranged and music, melee, magic, and all of these kind of fit in kind of concepts that existed in Scoured Lands.
Right. Cool. Awesome. And so like the music abilities, for example, would be something that would be bard based. Your magic would be spellcasters, things along those lines. Cool. And things like one of my favorite setting elements in Scoured Lands is tattoo magic, and those are covered. You have some of those, and those are covered under loot in the in Expedition.
Yeah. So we have, for example, we have the Dancing Ink loot card that functions a lot like you're talking about, where you store magic in your magic ability in your tattoo, and then you can play it later.
That's super cool. It's good. I love seeing how these things are sort of coming together into like this new, into a different realm. It's very neat. So, if people want to check out Expedition RPG, what would be, so somebody's watching this, they're new to it, they have no idea where to find it, where would they visit?
Yeah, so it's just expeditiongame.com.
Excellent. And you have a few other, now on there's a you can play online with the base rules for free, is that correct?
Yeah, so the entire game is actually open source. So the app and quest creator are open source. The cards themselves are also fully available. So if you go to cards.expeditiongame.com, you can actually print and play the cards either in black and white for your home printer. You can even download the full color version, and that lets you really kind of try out the game. You can open up the app as well. It's available on iOS, Android, and as a web app if you go to app.expeditiongame.com. So you can really kind of try the whole game before you decide.
Awesome. And they can get the professionally printed, really pretty, beautiful cards there as well, correct?
Yep. And we have.
Go ahead.
Oh, and so we have really two versions of the game. So there's the base game, which comes in this tiny little box. It just has the core mechanics, but the box actually has plenty of space in it. So this actually has all three expansions in it, without having to like get a different box. And then we have the deluxe edition here, which I love this box because it opens up kind of like a book.
Oh, nice.
And this has space for sleeved cards and many expansions to come.
Excellent. And it's also available through Tabletop Simulator. Is that correct? And
Yep.
And what expansions are currently on Tabletop Simulator right now?
Yeah, so we have the horror in the future on Tabletop Simulator, and we're currently working on porting Scoured Lands. So that should be hopefully available by the end of the year.
Awesome. Cool. And so what's next? What's the next plan for Expedition RPG?
Yeah, so we've been talking about that as a team, and there are a lot of kind of obvious candidates for boosters. So we do intend to kind of continue this cadence of boosters. We haven't picked the theme yet, but people love their different fandoms, so maybe there's another cross IP collaboration. Onyx Path, I know, has a lot of other IPs that we could potentially work with, or there's pirates or ninjas. So there's really a lot of kind of options when it comes to just giving the fans more content to play around with. We are also discussing kind of new mechanical approaches that might kind of be a longer term innovation. Like one of the ones that was actually one of our original ideas with Expedition was this idea of like Expedition Legacy, or cards that transform over time. I don't know if you've played like Risk Legacy or Pandemic Legacy, where you're kind of adding stickers to cards that change how they work.
Oh,
but you can.
That sounds neat, though.
Yeah, so you can imagine having like an adventurer card where after you go on your first quest, like if you lose the quest, you put a scar on them that penalizes them. But if you win the quest, you put like a boost to them, and that's like permanent. That's stuck on the card.
Oh, wow, yeah. So kind of like a, not really a leveling mechanic necessarily, but something that gives you like this sense that this character has lived in, that this character has a history. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. And then there was one other mechanic I did want to ask you about, because I haven't seen anything about it. Is there any setup for PvP in Expedition right now?
There's not a officially supported mechanic, and you could certainly, because characters are fairly well balanced with relative strength to each other. Like if you really wanted to, you could PvP, and I actually think there are a couple of community quests that have PvP type moments where you're like competing against each other in like a county fair or something.
Like archery competition type thing, something like that.
Yeah, but ultimately we decided that we didn't want that to be a core mechanic, because we saw this as more of a cooperative adventure game, more so than kind of a combat-driven fighting game.
Right. Cool. Well, and I personally, that is my personal preference. But I know that there's some people that like to just get together and beat the hell out of their friends, you know. so
Yep.
thought I'd ask for them. But well, I tell you what, Todd. Thank you so much for taking the time to come and hang out with us and talk a little bit about Expedition RPG. I'm sorry to the audience and to you for the late start this morning. For the gremlins, they happen. Tech happens. I'm gonna get the shirts made, I promise. And yeah, please do check out Expedition RPG. If you head over to Drive Through Cards, you can pick up Expedition Scoured Lands right now.
And we have a big banner for that on the top of our website as well.
Awesome. And it's you guys hit Copper bestseller pretty quickly when you drop to that. So it's good to see. It's and so far the feedback that I've heard has been very solid on it. I am anxiously awaiting my deck's arrival, and hopefully once that gets up there, maybe when we get it on Tabletop Simulator, or when my physical deck gets here, I'll run a solo play on here, or maybe we can work out a time, come together, and get a couple people and use that remote app. There's all sorts of opportunities, you know, when schedules can align and whatnot. I'd love to have you back on to do some more discussion of it.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for your time. Everybody watching at home, thank you so much. If you have not done so yet, please make sure you're following the channel so you know when we go live. Send us a sub. If you're an Amazon Prime user, you get one free sub a month, and we would love to be your free sub. Yeah, check out Expedition RPG, check out Scoured Lands, and we'll see you again real soon. Everybody have a good one.
Thank you.
Thank you.